Imagine stepping into a glittering gala, your heart pounding with the weight of family secrets, only to be shoved into the shadows like you don't exist. That's where Eleanor Vance found herself, alone in a sleek black gown, her Marine Corps medals tucked away, walking into Savannah's grandest ballroom. She wasn't invited. No one expected her. But the whispers of her name carried a sting sharper than any battlefield wound. This wasn't just a party, it was a stage for betrayal, and Eleanor was about to uncover a truth that would unravel her family's empire. The chandeliers gleamed, the air thick with jasmine and ambition, but beneath the polished smiles a plot was brewing, one that had erased her from her grandfather's legacy. By the end of this night, Eleanor would realize she wasn't just fighting for her name, she was fighting for her very existence. Stick with us, because this story of courage and deception will grip you until the final twist. If you're already hooked, hit that like button, drop a comment, share this with someone who loves a tale of justice, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that hit you right in the heart. The ballroom at the Forsyth Hotel pulsed with Savannah's elite, their laughter sharp as cut glass. Eleanor Vance, retired Marine Corps colonel, stood at the edge of the crowd, her boots polished but scuffed from years of service. She hadn't been back to Georgia in a decade, not since her grandfather Silas Boone's deathbed promise, "You're the one who carries this family's soul." No invitation had arrived for this charity gala, but her Aunt Clara's cryptic text, "They're rewriting the Boone name tonight," had pulled her here. Clara always stirred the pot, but this time her words felt like a warning carved in stone. Eleanor moved through the crowd, her presence drawing quick glances and hushed murmurs. Concierge, a nervous young man named Todd, scanned his list and froze when he saw her name. "Eleanor Vance," he muttered, as if saying it might summon a ghost. He pointed her to a table in the corner, half hidden by a wilting magnolia arrangement and a marble column. "Family overflow, table 12, back left." She walked deliberately, feeling eyes track her every step. The Boone family wanted her invisible, and this seating was no accident. It was a message. The center of the room, Lila Hammond, radiant in a silver gown, took the stage. She was married to Eleanor's cousin, Nathan Boone, and her smile was a weapon. Raising a champagne flute, she purred, "To those who've served our nation with valor, especially our dear Eleanor Vance, the family's very own checkpoint hero." The room erupted in laughter, sharp and rehearsed, as if Lila had pressed a button. Some clapped. Others looked away, unsure if this was jest or venom. Eleanor didn't flinch. Her gaze, honed by years of interrogations, locked onto Lila. The insult wasn't the wound, it was the precision. This wasn't spontaneous. It was scripted, approved, a public execution of her dignity. Nathan sat beside Lila, his eyes fixed on his plate, his hand limp in hers. Clara, seated across the room in a muted green dress, gave Eleanor a subtle nod, her lawyer's mind clearly uncomfortable in this charade. The laughter faded, but the air grew heavier, charged with something unspoken. Eleanor's fingers rested on the table, steady, counting the seconds until the room's attention shifted. Then came a sound, a cane tapping the floor. An older man, weathered but unbowed, rose from a nearby table. His voice cut through the din, clear and commanding. "Colonel Vance," he said, loud enough for every ear, "I served under you in Fallujah. You pulled my squad out of hell. Forgive this nonsense." The room froze. Lila's smile cracked. Nathan's head snapped up. Eleanor held the man's gaze, her heart a quiet drum. This was no longer just a gala. It was the first shot in a war she hadn't chosen, but one she'd finish. The Savannah ballroom held its breath as Colonel Amos Creed, his silver hair catching the chandelier's glow, stood like a monument to a forgotten war. His cane tapped once more, a deliberate echo that silenced the gala's lingering chuckles. Eleanor Vance sat motionless at table 12, her black gown blending into the shadows of the wilting magnolia, but her eyes, sharp, unyielding, locked onto Amos. He wasn't just a guest. He was a witness to her past, a tether to the truth her family wanted buried. The air crackled with unease as heads turned, whispers dying under the weight of his words. This moment wasn't just a defense, it was a gauntlet thrown, and Eleanor felt the spark of something fierce ignite within her. If her family thought they could erase her with a cruel toast, they'd just awakened a soldier who never backed down. Amos's voice carried the gravel of a man who'd seen too much. "Colonel Vance led us through fire in '03, he said, his gaze sweeping the room. "She carried wounded men on her back when our convoy burned. She's no checkpoint hero, she's the reason I'm standing here." Lila Hammond's champagne flute trembled, her smile a brittle mask. Nathan Boone, her husband, stared at his folded napkin, his fingers twitching as if caught in a trap. Crowds shifted, some leaning forward, others shrinking back, unsure whether to clap or cower. Clara Boone, Eleanor's aunt, watched from across the room, her lawyer's eyes glinting with something like pride. This wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a crack in the Boone family's carefully curated facade. Eleanor didn't move, didn't smile. She let Amos's words settle, each one a stone building a wall against the family's lies. The gala was meant to celebrate the Boone Foundation, a charity built on her grandfather Silas's legacy of service. But tonight it felt like a stage for rewriting history, her history. Lila's toast had been a calculated strike, approved by someone higher up the family chain, likely Eleanor's uncle, Victor Boone. He sat at the head table, his laugh the loudest when Lila spoke, his cufflinks glinting like tiny daggers. Now, his smirk faltered as Amos returned to his seat, leaving a silence so thick it pressed against the walls. Eleanor's mind raced, piecing together the puzzle. Aunt Clara's text had warned of a rewriting, and Lila's jab wasn't just personal, it was a signal. The Boone family had orchestrated this night to cement a new narrative, one where Eleanor didn't exist. But Amos's stand had flipped the script. Guests whispered, phones discreetly raised to capture the tension. A woman in a sequin dress leaned toward her companion, murmuring, "Is that true? Did she really save his unit?" The question hung unanswered, but it planted a seed, one Eleanor knew could grow into doubt, then truth. She sipped her water, her calm a practiced shield. Victor's eyes met hers briefly, then darted away. He adjusted his tie, a nervous tic she remembered from childhood arguments over Silas's estate. Back then, Victor had called her the soldier girl, dismissing her as a relic of Silas's military pride. Now she saw the same disdain, but laced with fear. Amos's words had done more than defend her. They'd exposed a crack in Victor's control, and Eleanor intended to pry it open. As the band struck up a jazzy tune, forcing the gala back to life, Eleanor leaned back, her mind already mapping the battlefield. Clara slipped her a note under a napkin. "Check Silas's old study. He never trusted Victor." Eleanor folded the note, her pulse steady but quick. Amos had given her a spark. Clara had handed her a map. The Boone family thought they'd buried her legacy, but they'd forgotten one thing. Soldiers don't stay buried. They rise and they fight. By the night's end, Eleanor knew this gala wasn't just a humiliation. It was the opening salvo in a war for her grandfather's truth, one she'd wage with every ounce of her training. The Savannah night hung heavy with secrets as Eleanor Vance slipped away from the gala's fading music, her boots silent on the cobblestone path leading to the Boone family mansion. Her grandfather Silas's old estate loomed like a sentinel, its brick facade weathered but unyielding under the moonlight. Clara's note burned in her pocket. "Check Silas's study." The words were a beacon, pulling her toward a truth her family had buried. Eleanor's pulse thrummed with the thrill of a mission, but this wasn't a battlefield of sand and steel. It was one of blood and betrayal. Somewhere in that house, Silas had left a piece of himself, a piece that could rewrite the lies Victor Boone had spun. The stakes were higher now. One wrong move and her family's empire would crush her for good. But Eleanor had faced worse odds and won. The mansion's front gate creaked open with the same code Silas had used for decades, 4 digits from his Marine Corps service number. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and thyme, every corner whispering memories of her grandfather's booming laugh and late-night talks about honor. Eleanor's friend, Jasper Tate, waited in his truck outside, his eyes scanning the dark windows for any sign of trouble. "You sure Victor's not here?" he whispered, handing her a flashlight. No one who matters, Eleanor replied, her voice steady but laced with steel. She moved through the foyer, past portraits of Boones long gone, their eyes seeming to judge her every step. Silas's study was on the second floor, behind a heavy oak door that hadn't been opened since his funeral. Eleanor pushed it open, the hinges groaning like a warning. Dust danced in the beam of her flashlight, settling on shelves bowed under the weight of legal binders and old ledgers. Her heart quickened as she recalled Silas's words from years ago. "If I ever go, Ellie, the truth's in my bunker." He'd meant the basement vault, a locked cabinet he'd jokingly called his fortress. She descended the narrow stairs, Jasper close behind, his quiet presence a steady anchor. The basement smelled of damp stone and secrets, its walls lined with storage tubs labeled with dates from the 90s. Behind a crate marked taxes 2004 to 2010, Eleanor found it, a small metal cabinet with a combination lock. Her fingers trembled as she spun the dial, 3 left, 2 right, 1 back. The lock clicked, and the door swung open, revealing a single black folder wrapped in a faded velvet cloth. She opened it, her breath catching. Paper inside was crisp despite its age, typed on Silas's old typewriter. The header read, Boone Estate Directive, February 2022. Eleanor's name was there, underlined in Silas's angular scrawl, listed as the sole heir alongside a note, "To my granddaughter who carries my honor." No mention of Victor or Nathan. A handwritten line at the bottom chilled her. "If they hide this, dig deeper." Jasper leaned over, his voice low. "This isn't notarized, but that's Silas's mark." He pointed to a faint embossed eagle, a military seal Silas used for sensitive documents. Eleanor's chest tightened, not with relief, but with a surge of purpose. This wasn't just a will, it was proof Victor had orchestrated her erasure. "Someone deleted me," she said, her voice sharp. "And they did it clean." Jasper was already setting up a portable scanner. "We back this up now," he said. "If Victor's people find it, it's gone." As the scanner hummed, Jasper's phone buzzed. He frowned, checking the screen. The Boone Foundation's server was accessed last night. File timestamps changed. From inside the estate. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Only family had that kind of access. Victor wasn't just rewriting the will. He was forging Silas's legacy. She clutched the folder, her mind racing. The Gala's humiliation, Amos's defense, and now this hidden truth. They were pieces of a puzzle she was only beginning to understand. Victor thought he'd buried her, but this folder was her weapon, and she'd wield it with the precision of a Marine. The mansion's silence felt alive now, watching, waiting for her next move. The Savannah sun burned low on Veterans Day, casting long shadows across the city's historic square where the Boone Foundation's annual ceremony unfolded. Flags snapped in the breeze, and veterans in crisp uniforms stood shoulder to shoulder, their medals glinting with pride. Eleanor Vance lingered at the crowd's edge, her Marine Corps pin hidden beneath her jacket, her heart a quiet drumbeat of anticipation. After finding Silas's true will in the mansion's vault, she and Jasper Tate had uncovered more, digital traces of Victor Boone's tampering, buried in the Foundation's servers. Today wasn't just a tribute to service, it was the stage for a reckoning. As Lila Hammond stepped to the podium, her voice honeyed and poised, Eleanor knew the trap was set. One misstep, and Victor's empire would crumble before the world's eyes. The air hummed with tension, and Eleanor was ready to strike. Lila's speech began smoothly, her silver dress catching the sunlight as she praised the Boone Foundation's commitment to veterans. "We honor those who've served, carrying forward the legacy of Silas Boone," she said, her smile practiced but fragile. Victor stood behind her, his hands clasped, his smirk a silent claim of victory. Nathan, her husband, looked pale, his eyes darting to the crowd. Eleanor stood still, her gaze fixed on the massive screen behind the stage where Jasper had planted their weapon, a hacked feed waiting to ignite. Crowd clapped politely, but Eleanor felt the weight of every stare, every whisper, as if the square itself sensed the storm brewing. Then it happened. The screen flickered, Lila's face replaced by a grainy video. Her voice, not from the podium but from a secret recording, filled the air. "I accessed the server," she said, her tone hushed, panicked. "As long as no one checks the timestamps, we're clear." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The screen shifted to a second clip. Victor, pacing in a dimly lit office. "Eleanor's a relic," he snarled. "We wiped her name." "No one will care." The audio cut, but the damage was done. Veterans in the front row turned, their eyes finding Eleanor. A retired Navy captain saluted her, slow and deliberate. A young Marine in a wheelchair raised a fist. The square fell silent, the weight of truth heavier than any speech. Lila spun toward the stage crew, hissing, "Cut it!" But the screen held firm, Jasper's backup device streaming from a hidden corner. A third clip played, an email draft from Silas timestamped months before his death. "My legacy belongs to Eleanor Vance. Victor acts without my consent." Crowds stirred, reporters scribbling furiously, phones raised to capture the chaos. Victor's face drained of color, his cufflinks no longer gleaming but dull under the scrutiny. Nathan stepped back, his hands slipping from Lila's, the distance between them a chasm. Eleanor didn't move, didn't gloat. She let the evidence speak, her silence a blade sharper than any shout. Clara Boone, watching from a nearby bench, gave Eleanor a nod, her lawyer's mind already calculating the fallout. The crowd's murmurs grew into a low roar, veterans standing one by one, their respect a silent rebuke to the Boone family's lies. A woman in the back whispered to her son, "She's the one who saved that unit in Fallujah, isn't she?" Questions spread, a spark catching fire. Eleanor's chest tightened, not with triumph but with purpose. This wasn't just about her. It was about Silas's honor, stolen and now reclaimed. As the ceremony dissolved into chaos, Jasper appeared at Eleanor's side, his voice low. "That was the first wave. We've got more." Eleanor nodded, her eyes on Victor, who was whispering urgently to a handler. The broadcast had exposed their deceit, but it was only the beginning. Silas's will, Amos's testimony, and now this public unmasking, they were threads in a tapestry Eleanor was weaving, one that would bind Victor's lies and burn them to ash. The square buzzed with energy, and Eleanor knew the next move would be hers, in a courtroom where truth would demand its due. The Savannah courthouse stood like a fortress of old justice, its marble steps worn smooth by decades of truth and lies. Inside, the hearing chamber buzzed with a restless crowd, reporters with poised pens, veterans with folded arms, and curious locals whispering about the Boone family's fall. Eleanor Vance sat at the plaintiff's table, her Marine Corps posture unyielding, her eyes locked on her uncle Victor Boone. His tailored suit and silver cufflinks couldn't hide the sweat beating at his temples. After the Veterans Day broadcast had exposed his deceit, Eleanor held Silas's true will, a weapon forged in her grandfather's hand. Today, she'd wield it to tear down Victor's empire. The air crackled with anticipation, every creak of a chair amplifying the stakes. One ruling could restore Eleanor's name, or bury it forever. The judge, a woman with steel-gray hair and a gaze sharper than a bayonet, called the session to order. Clara Boone, Eleanor's aunt and legal counsel, rose first, her voice calm but cutting. "This is about inheritance fraud, document tampering, and financial misconduct by Victor Boone, acting director of the Boone Foundation." She laid out the evidence with surgical precision. Silas's original will, found in the mansion's vault, naming Eleanor as sole heir. Colonel Amos Creed's video testimony, swearing Silas was lucid when he signed it, and a digital trail of Victor's server manipulations exposed by Jasper Tate's forensic work. Each piece landed like a grenade, the room's silence growing heavier with every word. Eleanor stood, her voice steady as she placed the red-sealed folder on the evidence table. "This is my grandfather's final directive," she said, certified by his military encryption code, accessible only through classified archives. "It proves I was erased." Victor's lawyer, a slick man named Preston Lyle, leaped up. "Your Honor, this is circumstantial at best. The email is unverified, the video could be AI-generated, and the will lacks notarization." Jasper countered, rolling a monitor forward. This video's metadata is timestamped and signed with Silas Boone's encryption key, used for a decade on legal documents. The blockchain hash proves it's untampered. The screen glowed with data, unassailable and cold. Crowd leaned forward, reporters scribbling as Victor's jaw twitched. Eleanor pressed on. Why has the Boone Foundation hidden its financial records for 3 years? Why are board members denied access? Preston stammered, but the judge cut him off. Relevant, she said, her tone a warning. Clara slid forward a final piece, Silas's unsent email draft, dated months before his death. If Victor alters this, it's not my will. Eleanor is my heir. The room stilled. Victor's hands gripped the table, knuckles white. This is a fabrication, he barked, but his voice cracked, betraying him. Amos Creed's testimony played next, his weathered face filling the screen. I saw Silas sign that directive. He was sharp as ever, and he trusted Eleanor. The veterans in the room nodded, their presence a silent chorus of support. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Boone, your response? Victor's eyes darted, but he only shook his head. It's all lies. Clara didn't flinch. Then let's audit the Foundation's accounts. If there's nothing to hide, you'll be cleared. The judge's gavel struck. I grant a temporary injunction on Victor Boone's control of the Boone Foundation. His personal accounts are frozen pending a full audit. He's under arrest for suspected fraud and forgery. Gasps erupted, pens scratching furiously. Victor sat frozen as agents cuffed him, his empire crumbling in the echo of that gavel. Eleanor didn't smile, she watched, her heart steady but fierce. Outside, cameras flashed, but she ignored them, walking past with Clara at her side. This isn't the end, Clara whispered. The audit's next. Eleanor nodded, her gaze on the horizon. Victor thought he'd erased her, but today she'd carved her name back into stone. The courtroom's weight lingered, but so did her resolve. Truth wasn't just her weapon. It was her legacy, and she'd guard it with everything she had. The Savannah air hung heavy with the scent of rain and regret as Eleanor Vance sat alone in her hotel room, the glow of a single lamp casting shadows across the desk. Courthouse victory had cracked Victor Boone's empire, but the fight wasn't over. A cream-colored envelope lay before her, its edges worn, addressed in a hurried scrawl, for Eleanor. It was from Lila Hammond, Nathan's wife, delivered quietly by a courier who'd vanished into the night. Eleanor's fingers hesitated, sensing the weight of what lay inside. The Veterans Day broadcast had exposed Lila's complicity, but this letter promised something more, a confession, a plea, or perhaps a trap. As she slid the letter opener through the flap, her heart beat like a war drum, knowing each word could shift the battlefield. The truth was close, but so was the danger, and Eleanor was ready to face both. She unfolded the letter, the paper trembling slightly in her hands. Lila's handwriting was jagged, ink smudged in places as if written through tears. Eleanor, you must despise me, it began, and maybe you should. But please, read this before you judge the monster I've become. Lila admitted to helping Victor erase Eleanor's name from Silas's will, not out of malice but fear. Victor had threatened to bankrupt Nathan's fledgling construction firm, to strip him of his stake in the Boone Foundation, to ruin their future. He controlled everything, Lila wrote, the lawyers, the board, even the press. He said you'd gone rogue, that you'd tarnished Silas's legacy. I believed him, or maybe I just didn't want to lose everything. Tucked inside the letter was a tiny memory card, its surface scratched but intact. Eleanor's breath caught as she inserted it into her laptop. A grainy audio file loaded, and Victor's voice filled the room, cold and clinical. You think you're family, Lila? Play your role, or I pull Nathan's funding. His company folds by morning. I own this legacy. Lila's voice, faint and shaking, responded. So you're blackmailing me? Victor's reply was a blade. No, I'm giving you clarity. The recording ended with a click, leaving silence that pressed against Eleanor's chest. This wasn't just evidence. It was a window into Victor's ruthlessness and Lila's regret. Eleanor leaned back, her mind racing. Lila's confession didn't absolve her, but it complicated the war. Victor hadn't just erased Eleanor. He'd coerced others into his scheme, turning family into pawns. She dialed Nathan's number, her fingers steady despite the storm in her chest. It rang 4 times before his voicemail kicked in. She tried again, and this time, he answered, his voice a hollow whisper. "I got your letter," Eleanor said, her tone even but sharp. "I heard the tape. Victor used you both." Silence stretched, broken only by Nathan's uneven breathing. "You knew something, didn't you?" she pressed. "You just didn't want to see how deep it went." He said nothing, and she hung up, the click louder than any shout. Jasper Tate knocked softly, stepping into the room. "You okay?" he asked, his eyes catching the letter. Eleanor handed him the memory card. "This changes things," she said. "It's not just about the will anymore. Victor's been pulling strings for years." Jasper nodded, already plugging the card into his laptop to back it up. "Clara's ready to move," he said. This could trigger a full audit of the Foundation's finances. Eleanor's gaze drifted to the window, where Savannah's lights flickered like distant stars. Lila's betrayal stung, but it was also a key, one that could unlock Victor's hidden accounts and expose his empire's rot. Clara's voice crackled through a video call. "That recording's enough for a criminal probe," she said, her lawyer's eyes gleaming. "We push for an audit now, and Victor's done." Eleanor sealed the letter and card in a folder, her resolve hardening. Lila had chosen fear over honor, but her confession was a crack in Victor's armor. Eleanor would widen it, not with anger, but with precision. The hotel room felt smaller now, the walls closing in with the weight of what came next. Victor thought he'd silenced her, but this letter was a spark, and Eleanor was ready to set his lies ablaze. The Boone estate stood like a relic under Savannah's twilight, its magnolia trees casting gnarled shadows across the lawn. Eleanor Vance walked the gravel path alone, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and fading summer. In her hand, she clutched a single sheet of paper, Victor Boone's forged will, the lie that had stripped her from her grandfather Silas's legacy. After Lila's confession and the courtroom's seismic ruling, Eleanor needed this moment, not for revenge, but for closure. The Veterans Day broadcast and the audit's looming threat had shaken Victor's empire, but this act would be hers alone. Under the ancient magnolia where Silas once told her stories of honor, she'd burn the deceit that tried to erase her. Every step toward the tree felt like a march to reclaim her name, but one misstep could still unravel everything. Tree's roots twisted into the soil, a survivor of storms and time, much like Eleanor herself. She knelt, her fingers brushing the earth as she dug a small hollow just deep enough to hold ashes. The forged will was crisp, its ink too perfect, Victor's signature a mockery of Silas's careful hand. Eleanor's heart beat steady, but her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what this moment meant. Silas had taught her that legacy wasn't land or money, it was truth, unyielding and pure. Victor had planted lies, weaving them into the Boone Foundation's records, but tonight Eleanor would bury them for good. She struck a match, the flame flaring bright against the dusk. As it touched the paper, the edges curled, blackening Victor's name first, then the false clauses that had cut her out. The fire was small but fierce, consuming the document until only ash remained, drifting into the hollow she dug. Eleanor watched, her breath steady, each flake a piece of Victor's betrayal dissolving into the earth. The magnolia loomed above, its leaves rustling as if Silas himself were watching, nodding in quiet approval. This wasn't just destruction, it was a ritual, a cleansing of the lies that had tried to redefine her. Jasper Tate stood at a distance, his silhouette blending into the shadows near the estate's gate. He hadn't followed her to the tree, sensing she needed this moment alone. But his presence was a reminder of the fight still ahead. The audit, triggered by Lila's recording, was closing in on Victor's offshore accounts, and Clara Boone was preparing a final legal strike. Eleanor buried the ashes, pressing the soil smooth with her palm. "He thought he could erase me," she whispered, more to Silas than herself. "But I'm still here." The words felt like a vow, sealed by the earth and the tree that had witnessed generations of boons. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. Clara's name lit up the screen. "We've got something," she said, her voice sharp with urgency. Bank records from the Caymans tied to Victor. They matched the timestamps from Lila's tape. Eleanor's pulse quickened. The ashes at her feet were symbolic, but this evidence was a weapon, hard, undeniable, and ready to dismantle Victor's empire in court. She stood, brushing dirt from her hands, her black jacket still carrying the faint scent of smoke. The estate felt different now, less like a mausoleum and more like a battlefield she'd already begun to win. As she walked back toward Jasper's truck, the stars emerged above Savannah, sharp and clear. The magnolia stood sentinel behind her, its roots deep, unyielding like the truth she carried. Victor's forged will was gone, but Silas's true directive lived in her hands, her heart and the evidence stacking against his brother. The audit would expose millions in misappropriated funds, and Clara's legal team was ready to seal Victor's fate. Eleanor glanced back at the tree one last time, feeling Silas's presence in the rustle of leaves. She'd burned the lie, but the truth was a fire that would keep burning, and no one, not Victor, not Lila, could extinguish it now. Savannah's City Hall stood modest under a late October sky, its brick facade glowing softly in the morning light. Chamber inside buzzed with quiet anticipation, packed with veterans, reporters, and Boone family allies turned silent witnesses. Eleanor Vance stood at the back, her Marine Corps pin glinting on her lapel, her heart steady but heavy with the weight of what was to come. Courtroom had cracked Victor Boone's empire, the audit had exposed his crimes, and Lila's confession had laid bare the family's betrayal. Today, Eleanor would reclaim her grandfather Silas's legacy, not with anger but with the quiet power of truth. As her name echoed through the room, every eye turned and she felt the tide shift. This wasn't just a ceremony, it was a restoration, and the world was watching. The mayor stepped to the podium, holding a simple certificate, its edges unadorned but its words monumental. "Eleanor Vance Boone," he announced, "is hereby recognized as the rightful heir and honorary leader of the Boone Foundation in perpetuity." Crowd rose, applause swelling like a wave, not for victory but for something deeper, honor restored. Veterans in the front row saluted, their hands steady with respect. Clara Boone, standing to Eleanor's right, gave a subtle nod, her lawyer's eyes gleaming with pride. Jasper Tate, camera in hand, captured the moment, his lens catching the light on Eleanor's pin like a spark. Eleanor stepped forward, her boots echoing on the polished floor. She didn't smile, didn't wave. She took the certificate, its weight more than paper, and set it aside. From her pocket, she pulled Silas's old Marine Corps insignia, a tarnished badge he'd kept hidden in his study. She placed it on the podium, her fingers brushing its edges, a silent promise kept. The room stilled, the gesture speaking louder than any speech. Then, from the crowd's edge, a figure moved, Nathan Boone, clean-shaven but hollow-eyed, without Lila at his side. He approached, holding a small wooden box. "Silas meant this for you," he whispered, handing it over. Inside was the Boone family crest, carved and weathered, its edges worn by time. Eleanor nodded, her voice low. "I know." The applause surged again, raw and unrehearsed, as veterans and civilians alike stood, their ovation a chorus of respect. Nathan stepped back, his eyes meeting Eleanor's for a fleeting moment before he retreated into the crowd. Clara leaned in, her voice a whisper. "He's trying to make amends, but he's alone now." Eleanor didn't respond, her gaze fixed on the insignia. This wasn't about Nathan or Lila. It was about Silas, about the legacy Victor had tried to steal. Cameras flashed, but Eleanor ignored them, her focus on the veterans saluting her, their faces etched with stories she understood without words. Sighed, the Savannah breeze tugged at her coat as she stood on the city hall steps. Reporters shouted questions, but she let them fade into the wind. Jasper caught up, his camera slung over his shoulder. "Where to now?" he asked, his voice soft but curious. Eleanor looked toward the Blue Ridge Mountains, their peaks a faint promise on the horizon. "Wherever I'm needed," she said, "but they'll have to ask." The fight was over, but the legacy was just beginning. Silas's truth had survived, carved into the Foundation's future by Eleanor's unwavering resolve. The savannah dusk settled gently, painting the sky in hues of amber and indigo. Eleanor stood alone on the Boone Estate's porch, the old house quieter now, its ghosts at rest. The magnolia tree in the yard stood sentinel, its leaves whispering memories of Silas. His laughter, his lessons, his unyielding belief in her. She'd kept only a fraction of the estate's wealth, funneling the rest into the Boone Honor Fund, a living tribute to veterans and truth. The forged will was ash, Victor's empire was dust, and Nathan's remorse was his own to carry. Eleanor's fight hadn't been for power, but for something deeper, a name, a memory, a legacy that no one could erase. She touched the family crest in her pocket, its edges smooth against her fingers, and felt Silas's presence, steady as ever. Justice hadn't shouted. It had walked in quietly, and its echo would last forever. If Eleanor's story stirred your heart, hit that like button and share it with someone who loves a tale of resilience. Drop a comment, type 1 if you felt her triumph, or 2 if you're craving more. Subscribe and ring the bell for more stories that remind us, truth always finds a way to rise.